The girl never imagined that only a month after she joined the Hitler Youth, Nazi Germany's front lines would collapse completely. Her father, a high-ranking German officer responsible for the slaughter of Jewish people, was frantically burning piles of secret documents while urging his wife and children to pack up quickly and prepare to move. Laura gazed wistfully around the room she had lived in for years, standing silently by the window as she watched her father's busy silhouette. Before they left, she even saw her father feeding poison to his beloved military dog. At that moment, Laura had no idea that the Nazi Germany she so deeply admired was already facing an irreparable downfall. She still believed that the recent defeats at the front were only temporary setbacks and was convinced that Germany would eventually claim the ultimate victory. Soon after, her father took the whole family to a wooden cabin deep in the countryside, which would serve as their temporary hideout. Once he had settled everyone in, he hurriedly departed again. Laura adored the beauty of the mountains and the fresh air. She sang and danced with her younger sister in the meadow, while her two little brothers ran wild across the hills like spirited ponies. But happiness is always fleeting. One morning, Laura's mother went out to the nearby town market to buy some supplies. It was supposed to be a 3-hour trip, but she didn't return until very late. Not only did she come back empty-handed, but all the money she carried had been stolen. She looked exhausted and deeply distressed. Sensible Laura rushed to comfort her mother, but her mother's temper suddenly flared. What Laura didn't know was that in town, her mother had been assaulted by several soldiers, and what broke her even more was learning that the Nazi leader she once revered had taken his own life. Crying, she told Laura everything. Her beloved mother had been violated, the leader she grew up worshipping was gone, and her father's fate remained uncertain. In that moment, Laura's perfect world collapsed completely. Her mother soon fell ill with a high fever, her mind drifting in and out of awareness, unable to leave her bed. From then on, Laura had to take responsibility for keeping the family alive. She brought some money to a neighbor's house, hoping to buy food. In those chaotic times, food was the most precious thing, and even money couldn't always buy it. But their kind neighbor took pity on them and agreed to sell some. Laura was overjoyed as she carried the food home, but on the way, she suddenly saw an Allied military truck coming from the direction of her house. Watching the speeding vehicle rush past her, Laura's sharp instincts immediately thought of her bedridden mother, and sensing danger, she ran toward home as fast as she could. When she finally got there, she discovered that her mother had already been taken away by the Allied soldiers. From that moment on, she had to shoulder the heavy burden of taking care of her 3 younger brothers and 1 little sister. To survive, she knocked on her neighbors' doors, hoping to use the money her mother left behind to buy some food. But because her father had been a Nazi officer and her mother had just been captured by the Allies, the terrified neighbors shut their doors and refused to see her. One day, in desperation to fill their stomachs, her brother sneaked into a neighbor's barn to steal milk, but he was caught on the spot. The furious neighbor shouted insults while throwing the metal bucket of milk onto the ground. Starving, the boy crouched down and began scooping the spilled milk into his mouth with his fingers. Laura was enraged, dropping the firewood she was carrying not because of the neighbor's humiliation, but because her brother had stolen. She stuffed her brother into a wooden box and slammed the lid shut, while another brother knelt beside the box, begging her to stop. After a few minutes, Laura calmed down and let him out, telling him firmly, "Our father is an honorable German officer, and I am a member of the Youth League. There can never be a thief in our family." Laura also realized that if things continued like this, their lives would only become harder. In the end, she gathered the few pieces of jewelry left in the house, then packed up with her younger siblings, carrying large bundles as they prepared to go find their grandmother in Hamburg. Laura managed to stop a couple who were moving away with a horse-drawn cart, offering to pay them if the man would take them to the train station, but the man told her that the trains were now under the control of the American army and were being used to transport soldiers and supplies. Ordinary civilians were not allowed to ride them. He then pointed them toward a route that could lead to Hamburg. Following the man's directions, they began their long walk toward Hamburg, but it wasn't long before they found themselves stuck in a swampy stretch of mud. The soft, uneven ground was nearly impossible to cross, and in the end, they were forced to throw away much of their luggage. Soon after, they reached a dense forest just one day before Germany officially announced its unconditional surrender. All across the country were ruins and streams of refugees. Everywhere they looked were discarded belongings, yet food was the rarest and most precious thing of all. Laura searched desperately inside a chicken coop, but found nothing, and in the room beside it, she stumbled upon the body of a woman who had been brutally attacked and killed. Terror, fury, despair, and helplessness surged through her all at once, and at that very moment, her siblings slowly walked in behind her. Panicked, Lore quickly led them out of the house, determined to find food. She summoned her courage and entered another house, but again found nothing except a man sleeping in the corner. Startled by the sudden sight of a stranger, the wary Lore turned and hurried away. After more searching, Lore finally found a house where someone actually lived. She took out her remaining jewelry and traded it with the woman there for a bit of food. From then on, the children who had once lived under their parents' protection began learning to cook and survive on their own. The youngest brother was already crying loudly from hunger, and no matter how hard Lore tried, she couldn't calm him down. In the end, she had no choice but to put him on the ground and let him cry as he pleased. After a long, exhausting struggle, the starving children finally managed to eat a half-cooked dinner. The next morning, they reached a nearby town. Although the government had completely collapsed, the place was still crowded with refugees. Lore searched everywhere and finally found a woman holding a baby. She pleaded with the woman to feed her little brother, but the woman ignored her. In the end, Lore had to take out a piece of jewelry to trade for one chance for her baby brother to be nursed. That same afternoon, she heard the news that Nazi Germany had announced its unconditional surrender. At that moment, all of Lore's beliefs were shattered. Raised from childhood under Nazi ideology, she had always believed that Germany would win in the end. But instead, what she heard was the final announcement of defeat. It was also there that she once again met the same man she had seen earlier, sleeping in the corner of an abandoned house. Without saying a word, the man rushed toward her, pinned her against the wall, and tried to overpower her. Fortunately, someone happened to pass by, and Lore managed to escape. But what she never expected was that the next morning, as she continued her journey, she suddenly realized that the man was following her from behind. Terrified, she grabbed her brothers and sister and began to run, but the man kept following closely. Soon, they passed by a farmhouse to escape from the man and to find something to eat. Lore slowly walked into the house, only to hear the old woman inside say she had no food, only water. At that moment, the old woman heard the hungry cry of Lore's baby brother and walked over to take a look, but still insisted that she was struggling herself and couldn't offer any food. Desperate, Lore took out one of her mother's pieces of jewelry, hoping to trade it for something to eat. But the old woman, knowing how scarce food had become and how high prices were, tried to take advantage of the situation. Seeing this, Lore hesitated, then slowly took out her mother's wedding ring from her cloth bag. She held it in her hand for a long moment, and finally, to keep her siblings from going hungry, she handed the ring over to the old woman. Satisfied, the woman not only gave them food but also offered them warm water to wash with. But Lore's sister blamed her for giving away the ring, saying the old woman had taken advantage of them and that the ring was the only thing their mother had left behind. Lore understood every word her sister said, but what else could she do while wandering the countryside with 4 younger siblings to care for? That afternoon, Lore accidentally discovered a man sitting motionless on a wooden chair inside a nearby barn. Gathering her courage, she slowly approached him, and when she came close, she saw that his right hand was holding a gun and that there was a bloody hole in his head, with flies and insects swarming around it. The horrifying sight of suicide made her tremble and nearly stop breathing, but then she noticed the watch on the man's left wrist. Lore forced herself to reach out and unbuckle the watch, knowing that it could be traded for food, the only hope they had to stay alive. When Lore left the old woman's house and continued her journey, she realized that the man from before was still following behind them, just as he had for the past few days. While her brothers and sister rested, Lore gathered her courage and walked up to the man. He stayed silent, chewing something in his mouth while staring blankly at her. Lore took another cautious step closer, but he remained motionless, saying nothing. In the days that followed, the man continued to follow them wherever they went. Then one day, they unexpectedly encountered a group of American soldiers on the road. Lore hurriedly told her siblings to keep their heads down and keep walking, but they were stopped by the soldiers. The Americans demanded to see their travel permits. Lore quickly explained that she was only trying to take her brothers and sister to their grandmother's house in Hamburg, but because she had no travel papers, the soldiers said they had to take her back for questioning. At that critical moment, Thomas, the man who had been quietly following the girl all along, stepped forward. He took out his own travel pass and told the soldiers, "They're my younger brother and sisters." The soldier didn't fully believe him, so he called over the little girl standing in the distance to question her. Luckily, the clever child answered just right, and they managed to get through. After this incident, Thomas no longer needed to follow behind Lore in secret. He could finally walk openly beside her. When Lore fell ill, Thomas supported her and helped her keep moving. When Lore was hungry, he searched everywhere for food. With Thomas's help, Lore and her siblings finally didn't have to struggle as desperately as before. But one day, Lore suddenly pulled all the food to her side, giving Thomas only a small piece, because she had noticed the prisoner's tattoo on his arm, the mark from a concentration camp. It was clear that Thomas was Jewish, yet Lore's father had been a high-ranking Nazi officer who executed Jewish people, and Lore herself was a member of the Hitler Youth. Raised under Nazi beliefs, she had been taught to hate Jews all her life. Even though Thomas was denied his share of the food she had worked so hard to find, he said nothing. He simply stared at her in silence, then picked up the small piece she had thrown to him and ate it with quiet determination. Though Lore spoke to him coldly, Thomas continued to look after them every day, never complaining, never asking for anything in return. And as the days passed, Lore began to realize that she might have fallen in love with him. Her eyes would unconsciously follow him wherever he went, and without noticing it, Thomas had slowly entered her heart. But the hatred that had been ingrained in her since childhood now clashed violently with this growing affection, leaving Lore torn and uneasy. One day, their path was blocked by a wide river. The bridge that once spanned it had been destroyed during the war. After searching for a long time, Lore found a small wooden boat on the riverbank. She begged the boat's owner to help them cross, but the man, noticing her beauty, made indecent remarks and asked her to come closer so he could get a better look. As Lore hesitantly stepped closer, the man reached out and began to touch her. Terrified, she pushed him away and stumbled back. Enraged, the man jumped up and refused to help them cross. With no other choice, Lore took out the watch she had once taken from the dead man and offered it to him, but the man said it wasn't enough. Lore then slowly took out a small ceramic deer from her bag, the birthday gift she had prepared for her brother next month. But the man sneered and said, "If you don't have money, stop bothering me." Desperate to cross, Lore dropped her bag to the ground and slowly began to unbutton her shirt. The man immediately reached out and pulled her into his arms. From a distance, hidden among the trees, Thomas saw everything clearly. Without hesitation, he picked up a rock and rushed forward. Seizing his moment, he struck the man hard, knocking him to the ground. Lore froze, watching in shock as the man groaned in pain, and Thomas raised the rock again, hitting him repeatedly until he stopped moving. Lore stood still, trembling in fear, unable to move or speak. Thomas quietly walked up to her and helped button her shirt. With his help, Lore and her siblings finally crossed the river in the wooden boat, but Lore couldn't calm down. She stared across the water at Thomas, at his cold, unreadable face, and a wave of anger and fear rose inside her. To her, Thomas now seemed terrifying, dangerous, a killer. When they reached the opposite shore, Thomas offered his hand to help her out of the boat, but Lore stood in the shallow water, her face pale with fear. Backing away from him, Thomas stepped forward slowly, trying to help, but Lore stumbled, lost her footing, and fell into the river. Without hesitation, Thomas dove in and pulled her out. The baby brother in her arms had been soaked and began crying loudly, while Lore stubbornly refused Thomas's help, struggling to walk to the bank on her own. Soon, they arrived at an American checkpoint. Among them, only Thomas, the man who had been freed from the camp, had valid papers. He showed his pass and pretended to be their older brother as they approached the guards, but the soldiers told them the road ahead was under military lockdown and no one was allowed to pass. Left with no choice, they took a rough, narrow path instead. That evening, Thomas went out to look for food, but he didn't return. Lore and her siblings waited anxiously, hoping he would come back. Then suddenly, her little brother spotted someone approaching and, thinking it was Thomas with food, ran toward him with excitement. Lore followed behind, shouting for him to stop, but he didn't listen. The next moment, a gunshot echoed across the forest. Lore screamed in despair, her voice breaking, but another shot followed, and her brother fell to the ground. Thomas came running from the woods, grabbing Lore by the arm and dragging her as they fled while bullets whizzed behind them. It turned out Thomas had stolen food from someone, and the pursuers were shooting at him, but Lore's innocent brother had been caught in the chaos and killed by mistake. Lore blamed Thomas entirely for her brother's death, shouting that it was his theft that had brought this tragedy upon them. Thomas, who had spent years surviving in the camp and had long grown numb to death, said nothing. He didn't defend himself. He simply decided to leave. As Lore watched him walk away, she broke down and ran after him, begging him not to go. In that moment, she realized she truly loved him. Even though he was someone she had been taught to hate, even though he had caused her brother's death, even though everything she had believed and said she shouldn't love him, none of it mattered anymore. She only wanted to stay by his side, but Thomas refused her. When he still turned to leave, Lore's pain turned to fury. She screamed at him, calling him a liar, saying all Jews were deceitful and untrustworthy.
Ihr ganzen dreckigen Juden! Manchmal sehe ich dich an. Ich kann sie sehen. Eine Lüge nach der anderen.
Thomas remained silent, but in the end, he stayed. A few days later, Thomas brought Laura and her siblings to a train heading for Hamburg, their grandmother's home. Once they arrived, they would finally have food and shelter, no longer wandering in fear and hunger. But just as the train began to move, Thomas quietly jumped off. Without a word, he disappeared from Laura's life forever. She never saw him again. Laura could never understand why Thomas had chosen to leave her. What she didn't know was that Thomas had never been a Jewish prisoner at all. He had been a German officer in the concentration camp, a Nazi captain who escaped after being captured by the Americans. He had disguised himself as a Jewish survivor to hide his identity. He was a fugitive, destined to wander alone. After a long and painful journey, Laura and her siblings finally reached their grandmother's home. Seeing their thin, weary faces, the old woman rushed to them with tears in her eyes. The next morning, Laura woke up in a warm, comfortable bed. Outside, the sun was shining, and a gentle breeze brushed through the air. She slowly took out the small ceramic deer from her pocket, the birthday gift she had meant to give her brother next month. But now, the gift remained, and her brother was gone, buried forever in the cold forest. Laura placed the little deer on the floor and crushed it under her foot. Outside, the birds scattered, the sunlight remained, and the breeze softly moved the air. Everything had ended, and yet somehow, it all felt as if it were just beginning. I'm a movie enthusiast. Thanks for watching. See you next time.